When a billionaire offered a broke waitress $100,000 to answer one question, he thought he was playing a game. He had no idea she'd been planning her revenge for 6 months, or that hidden inside her uniform was a live camera broadcasting his darkest secret to the world. In 60 seconds, the untouchable CEO who destroyed her family would lose everything: his empire, his freedom, and the lie he'd protected for 25 years. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with power. It's the one with nothing left to lose. Stay until the end to see how this all unfolds. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Obsidian Club didn't announce itself with neon signs or velvet ropes. You either knew where it was or you didn't matter enough to find out. Tucked 3 stories beneath a limestone building in Manhattan's financial district, the club existed in a world where wealth wasn't displayed. It was assumed. Down here, the champagne cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the conversations could move stock markets before morning. Emily Carter had been working there for 6 months, and she still felt like an imposter every time she walked through the service entrance. 29 years old, pale from too many night shifts and not enough sleep, she kept her dark hair pulled back tight and her eyes down. That was the uniform, really. The black dress and white apron were just accessories. The real requirement was invisibility. "Table 7 needs a refresh, Marcus," the floor manager said without looking at her. He was arranging glasses on a tray with the precision of a surgeon. "The vault room." Emily's hand stilled on the wine bottle she'd been holding. "Tonight?" she asked. "You got a problem with that?" "No, no problem." Marcus finally looked at her, his expression flat. "The vault's not like the main floor, Carter. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact. You definitely don't fuck up. These people could buy this building with what's in their pockets, and they don't like being reminded that staff exist." "I understand." "Do you?" He handed her the tray. "Because last month Jenny refilled a glass before it was empty, and she hasn't worked here since." Emily took the tray. Her hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken in a long time. "I'll be invisible," she said. Marcus nodded and turned away. "You've got 5 minutes." The vault room sat at the very back of the club, behind a door that required 3 separate key cards to open. Emily had only been inside twice before, both times to help with setup before guests arrived. She'd never served there during an actual event. Until tonight. She checked her reflection in the small mirror near the service station. Hair perfect, makeup minimal. The tiny camera pin on her collar, hidden in the black fabric, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Emily touched it once, briefly, then picked up her tray and walked toward the vault. The hallway leading to the room was lined with dark wood panels and lit by soft amber sconces. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet. She could hear voices ahead, low, confident, occasionally punctuated by laughter that didn't sound like it had anything to do with humor. The door was already open. Emily paused at the threshold, waiting for the current server, an older woman named Patricia, to finish and leave. Patricia came out carrying an empty tray, saw Emily, and gave her a look that might have been sympathy or warning. Probably both. Then Emily stepped inside. The vault room was smaller than the main dining area, but felt larger because of the ceiling height and the massive crystal chandelier that hung at its center like a frozen explosion. The walls were covered in burgundy fabric, and the lighting was deliberately dim, bright enough to see faces, dark enough to hide expressions you didn't want read. 8 people sat around a table that could have seated 20. Emily recognized most of them from photographs in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Victor Castellano, who owned half the commercial real estate in Manhattan. Rebecca Whitmore, whose hedge fund had posted returns that made other investors weep with envy. James Chen, the venture capitalist who could make or break a startup with a single phone call. And at the head of the table, sitting with the kind of casual authority that came from never having to prove anything, was Nathaniel Hayes, 32 years old. Billionaire. CEO of Hayes Global, a private equity firm that had its fingers in everything from pharmaceutical companies to tech startups to media conglomerates. Single father to a 6-year-old daughter he barely mentioned in interviews, but whose photo sat on his desk in every office profile piece. Emily had studied his face for months. The sharp jawline, the dark hair he kept just long enough to run his hands through when he was thinking, the blue eyes that looked warm in photographs but cold in person. She'd memorized the way he smiled, not with his whole face, but with just his mouth, like the expression was a tool he'd learned to use effectively. Right now, he wasn't smiling. He was listening to Victor Castellano complain about city zoning regulations while slowly turning a glass of scotch on the table in front of him. His jacket was off, draped over the back of his chair. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. Emily approached the table from the left side, moving quietly, keeping her tray level. She started with Rebecca Whitmore, who was in the middle of saying something about quarterly projections, and didn't acknowledge Emily's presence as her champagne glass was refilled. James Chen waved her off without looking. Victor Castellano let her top off his drink while still talking, his hand gesturing broadly enough that Emily had to step back to avoid being hit. Then she reached Nathaniel Hayes. His glass was still half full. Emily knew the protocol. Wait until it was less than a third. Never interrupt. Never assume. But her hand was already moving. She reached for his glass, just an inch, just the beginning of the gesture, and Nathaniel's hand came down on hers so fast she didn't have time to pull back. Not hard, not painful, but firm enough that every conversation at the table stopped. The room went silent. Emily froze, her hand still extended, caught beneath his palm on the stem of his glass. Nathaniel didn't look at her immediately. He finished whatever thought he'd been processing, took a slow breath, and only then turned his head to meet her eyes. "Did I ask for more?" he said quietly. "No, sir. I apologize. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. Did I ask for more?" His voice wasn't raised. It was almost gentle. That somehow made it worse. "No," Emily said. "You didn't." "Interesting." Nathaniel released her hand and leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What's your name?" Marcus's words echoed in her head. "You don't speak unless spoken to." "Emily, sir." "Emily." He said it like he was tasting the word. "How long have you worked here, Emily?" 6 months? 6 months. And in those 6 months, has anyone explained to you how things work in this room? Someone at the table laughed. Emily didn't look to see who. "Yes, sir," she said. "Then help me understand something." Nathaniel picked up his glass and held it up to the light, examining it like there was something fascinating in the amber liquid. "Why would you reach for a glass that's still half full? Are you trying to be helpful, efficient, or do you just not pay attention?" Emily's pulse was steady. She'd prepared for this. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. She'd known that eventually Nathaniel Hayes would notice her. She just hadn't expected it to be tonight. "I made a mistake," she said. "It won't happen again." "A mistake?" Nathaniel set the glass down and looked at her properly now, his gaze moving over her face with the kind of focus that made her skin prickle. "You know what I love about mistakes, Emily? They reveal character. How someone reacts when they fuck up tells you everything you need to know about them." Victor Castellano chuckled. "Careful, Nate. You're going to make the poor girl cry." "Am I?" Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Are you going to cry, Emily?" "No, sir." "Good. I hate tears." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Let's play a game instead." Emily said nothing. "Here's how it works," Nathaniel continued. "I'm going to ask you one question, just one. If you answer it honestly, and I mean completely, brutally honestly, I'll give you $100,000, cash, transferred to whatever account you want by tomorrow morning." The silence in the room shifted. Now people were paying attention. Rebecca Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Nate, what are you doing?" "Conducting an experiment." His eyes never left Emily's face. "But if you lie, or if you refuse to answer, or if your answer is boring, well, then I'll make a phone call to every club, restaurant, and hotel in this city. And you'll never work in hospitality again. Not here, not anywhere that matters." Emily's hands tightened on the tray she was still holding. James Chen leaned back in his chair. "Jesus, Nate, it's just a waitress." "Exactly," Nathaniel said. "It's just a waitress. So it's just a game. No harm either way, right?" He looked at Emily. "Unless you're scared." This was it. 6 months of planning, 6 months of being invisible, of listening, of waiting for the exact right moment. And here it was. Emily set down her tray on the sideboard near the wall. She turned back to face Nathaniel Hayes, and for the first time since entering the room, she looked directly at him without dropping her gaze. "What's the question?" she asked. Nathaniel smiled. This time it reached his eyes, but there was no warmth in it, just the satisfaction of someone who'd gotten exactly what they wanted. He gestured around the room, taking in the crystal chandelier, the expensive art on the walls, the people sitting around the table whose combined net worth could fund a small country. "What's the most expensive thing in this room?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Someone laughed, a short, nervous sound quickly cut off. Emily stood very still. She let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. 10. Then she started walking, not away from the table, around it. "Emily!" Marcus had appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "What are you doing?" She ignored him. Emily moved slowly around the table, her footsteps deliberate now, audible in the quiet room. When she reached Victor Castellano, she stopped. "Mr. Castellano owns 18 buildings in Manhattan," she said. Her voice was calm, conversational. 12 of them are rent-controlled properties that should be providing affordable housing. Instead, he's been using harassment and illegal buyouts to force tenants out, so he can convert them to luxury condos. The documentation is hidden in an LLC registered in Delaware, but the paper trail leads straight back to him. Victor's face went red. "You can't—" Emily moved on. She stopped behind Rebecca Whitmore. "Ms. Whitmore's hedge fund posted 18% returns last quarter," Emily continued. "Which is impressive, until you realize those returns came from insider trading. Her boyfriend works in mergers and acquisitions at Goldman Sachs. He's been feeding her information about upcoming deals for 3 years. The SEC hasn't caught on yet because she's careful about how she executes the trades. But the pattern is there if anyone looks closely enough." Rebecca's champagne glass slipped in her hand. She caught it before it fell, but barely. "How do you—" she started. Emily kept moving. James Chen, Senator Patricia Morrison, who Emily hadn't initially recognized in the dim light. David Rothstein, whose pharmaceutical company had just raised prices on insulin by 300%. One by one, Emily walked around the table and spoke. She told them about the mistress in Brooklyn, the embezzled pension fund, the environmental violations covered up with falsified reports, the charity that was actually a tax shelter, the blackmail scheme, the medical research buried because it would hurt quarterly profits. Every secret, every crime, every piece of ugly truth they thought was safely hidden behind lawyers and NDAs and money. She'd heard it all. 6 months of serving champagne while they talked, like she wasn't there. 6 months of clearing plates while they made deals and confessions and threats, never once considering that the woman in the black dress might be listening. By the time Emily completed the circuit of the table and came back to stand in front of Nathaniel Hayes, the room had gone from silent to suffocating. Victor Castellano was gripping the edge of the table. Rebecca Whitmore looked like she might be sick. Even James Chen, who usually wore smugness like cologne, had gone pale. Nathaniel was the only one who didn't look rattled. He was watching Emily with something that might have been curiosity or might have been rage. Hard to tell. "That's quite a collection of gossip," he said finally. "But you didn't answer my question. What's the most expensive thing in this room?" Emily reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a phone. Not the sleek smartphone most people carried. This was old, at least a decade, maybe more. The screen was cracked. The case was held together with tape, the kind of phone you'd find in a drawer and wonder why anyone kept it. She set it on the table in front of Nathaniel. "This," Emily said. Nathaniel looked at the phone, then back at her. "You're joking." "No. That thing is worth maybe $20, probably less." "You're wrong." Emily pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Somewhere behind her, Marcus made a strangled sound, but she didn't turn around. "That phone is worth your entire empire." Now she had his full attention. Nathaniel leaned forward. "Explain." Emily kept her hands flat on the table, steady, calm. 25 years ago, she said, you were at a party, private estate in the Hamptons. You were 19, home from your sophomore year at Yale. You drank too much. You got in your car anyway. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. On Route 27, about 3 miles from the estate, you ran a red light and hit another car. A family of 3. Michael and Sarah Chen, no relation to James here, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lisa. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The crash killed all 3 of them instantly, Emily continued. You were drunk, you were speeding, and you were scared. Because even though your family had money, vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated would have meant prison time. Real prison, not the kind you can buy your way out of. And that would have ruined everything. Yale, your father's business plans for you, your entire future. She paused. So you made a call. Your father came, and he brought the family lawyer, and together you all decided on a solution. Someone else would take the blame. Someone loyal. Someone who could be compensated for his sacrifice and his silence. Emily picked up the phone. That someone was my father, she said quietly. Thomas Carter. He worked in your father's accounting department. He'd been there for 15 years. He was dependable, quiet, and he had a wife and a 10-year-old daughter, me, and your father promised him that if he took responsibility for the crash, the family would be taken care of. Money for his wife. A college fund for his daughter. A job waiting for him when he got out. Nathaniel had gone very still. My father spent 12 years in prison, Emily said. 12 years for a crime you committed. And when he got out, there was no money, no college fund, no job. Your father had died 7 years into the sentence, and you... She looked directly at Nathaniel. You didn't honor the agreement. You claimed you didn't know about it, that it was all your father's doing and the man had paid for his loyalty. Case closed. This is... Nathaniel started. My father died 8 months after his release. Emily cut him off. Liver failure. But really, it was the prison that killed him. 12 years in a cell for something he didn't do, and nothing to show for it except a criminal record and a family that looked at him like he was a stranger. She set the phone down again. This was his phone, she said, the one he had before he went to prison. He kept it all those years. Never told anyone why. Never explained what was on it. He just held on to it, even when everything else was gone. Emily tapped the screen. It lit up, battery still showing half full despite its age. 2 days after the crash, she said, you called him. Late at night, from a burner phone. You begged him to take the blame. You cried. You promised him everything, money, security, a future for his family. You told him it was the only way, that if he didn't do this, your father would make sure he lost his job anyway, and then he'd have nothing. She turned the phone around so Nathaniel could see the screen. A single audio file. Timestamped 25 years ago. He recorded the call, Emily said. Every word, every promise, every lie. Nathaniel's hand moved toward the phone, but Emily was faster. She pulled it back. You should know, she said, that I've spent the last 6 months trying to decide what to do with this. I could have gone to the police immediately. I could have sold it to a journalist. I could have posted it online and watched your life burn down in real time. What do you want? Nathaniel's voice was hoarse. I wanted to look you in the eye first, Emily said. I wanted to watch you sit here in your private club, surrounded by all your powerful friends, and realize that you couldn't buy your way out. Not this time. She stood up. To answer your question, the most expensive thing in this room is the truth, and you're about to find out exactly what it costs. Emily reached up and touched the pin on her collar. This is a camera, she said. Live streaming. It's been recording since I walked in. Every word you said, every word I said, the whole conversation about the secrets around this table, that was just context. But this? She held up the phone. This is what people came to see. Nathaniel lunged across the table. He was fast, but Emily had expected it. She stepped back and his hand caught only air. The phone slipped from her fingers, deliberately, and hit the floor. But it didn't matter. I already played the recording, Emily said, about 5 minutes ago while I was walking around the table. Everyone watching the stream heard it. Your voice, your confession, your promises to my father. Nathaniel stared at her, his face white. By now, Emily continued, it's been clipped and shared across every social media platform. It's trending on Twitter, it's on Reddit. Someone's probably already sent it to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and every major news outlet that might be interested in a billionaire CEO covering up vehicular manslaughter. She picked up the phone from where it had fallen and slipped it back into her pocket. You offered me $100,000 to answer one question honestly, she said. I did that. But I don't want your money, Mr. Hayes. I never did. Marcus was in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling security. Other staff members had gathered behind him, faces shocked. Emily walked toward the door. She stopped next to Nathaniel, who was still standing, his hands braced on the table like he might collapse without the support. My father's name was Thomas Carter, she said quietly, just for him. You should remember it, because it's going to be in every headline tomorrow morning, right next to yours. Then she walked out. Behind her, the vault room erupted in chaos, voices shouting, chairs scraping, phones ringing. Emily didn't look back. She walked through the hallway, past the main dining room where guests were already pulling out their phones and staring at screens with expressions of shock, past the coat check where the attendant was watching a video that Emily recognized as her own stream. She walked up the stairs, through the service entrance, and out into the Manhattan night. The air was cold, October wind cutting through her thin uniform. Emily stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, from release. 6 months of planning, 6 months of rage held carefully in check, of smiling politely and saying, "Yes, sir," and "Right away, ma'am," while listening to people who thought they were untouchable. Her phone buzzed. Not the old one in her pocket, her actual phone. She pulled it out and saw the notifications flooding in. The stream had peaked at 200,000 live viewers. The recording had already been downloaded and re-uploaded thousands of times. Hashtag Nathaniel Hayes was trending #1 worldwide. Another buzz. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Sarah Chen from the New York Times. We'd like to speak with you about tonight's events. Please call when you're able." Then another. "CNN would like to book you for an interview." And another. "The Manhattan District Attorney's Office would like to speak with you regarding the recording you released tonight." Emily silenced her phone and put it away. She started walking, away from the Obsidian Club, away from the lights and the sirens that were already starting to wail in the distance. She had one more stop to make tonight. The storage unit in Queens was small and climate-controlled, rented under a fake name and paid for in cash. Emily had been visiting it once a week for 6 months, adding to the collection inside. She opened the door and turned on the light. The space was lined with filing boxes, each one labeled with a name: Victor Castellano, Rebecca Whitmore, James Chen, Senator Patricia Morrison. All the secrets she'd collected, all the evidence she'd gathered while being invisible. The recording of Nathaniel Hayes was just the beginning. Emily pulled out her phone and opened her email. She'd drafted the messages weeks ago, one for each person in that room. Each email contained a simple message: what Emily knows, the world will know, unless you make it right. Attached to each email was a file, evidence of crimes, proof of corruption, everything she'd overheard in 6 months of serving drinks and being ignored. But these emails also included instructions. Victor Castellano would return his buildings to affordable housing or face prosecution. Rebecca Whitmore would turn herself in to the SEC, or Emily would do it for her. James Chen would fund a scholarship program for underprivileged students or watch his empire crumble in the press. Justice, Emily had learned, came in many forms. Punishment was one, restitution was another. She sent the emails and closed her laptop. Outside the storage unit, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Somewhere, Nathaniel Hayes was probably in a conference room with lawyers, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. He couldn't. The truth was already out there, spreading like fire across dry wood. Emily locked the unit and walked back out into the night. She had an appointment in the morning with the district attorney, then another with her father's old public defender, who'd been trying to get his case reopened for years. Then maybe, finally, she could rest. But not yet. The work was just beginning. The Manhattan District Attorney's office smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Emily sat in a waiting room on the 8th floor, watching lawyers and paralegals rush past with armfuls of files, none of them making eye contact. She'd been there for 40 minutes. Her phone was still off. She knew what would be waiting when she turned it on. Hundreds of messages, missed calls, interview requests from every news outlet in the country. The video had gone viral in a way that even she hadn't fully anticipated. By 3 a.m., it had been viewed over 5 million times. By dawn, that number had tripled. "Ms. Carter?" A woman stood in the doorway. Mid-40s, black suit, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She had the exhausted expression of someone who'd been awake for 36 hours straight. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Sarah Vance," she said. "Sorry for the wait. It's been a long night." Emily stood and followed her down a hallway lined with framed photographs of former district attorneys. All men, all looking stern and self-important. Vance's office was small and cluttered. files stacked on every surface. A desk calendar from 2023 still hanging on the wall. She gestured to a chair and closed the door. "Before we start," Vance said, sitting down behind her desk, "I need to tell you that this conversation is being recorded. Anything you say can and will be used in our investigation. You have the right to have an attorney present. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Do you want an attorney?" "Not yet." Vance studied her for a moment, then pulled out a legal pad and a pen. "Walk me through it," she said. "Everything. Start with how you got the recording." Emily had prepared for this. She'd rehearsed the story 100 times, making sure every detail was clean, every timeline matched, every piece of evidence traceable. "My father died 18 months ago," she began. "When I was going through his things, I found the phone. It was in a box in his closet, wrapped in an old shirt. At first I thought it was just junk, but when I charged it and turned it on, I found the recording." "And you recognized Nathaniel Hayes' voice?" "Not immediately, but my father had kept newspaper clippings about Hayes, articles about his business success, profiles in magazines. I always wondered why he cared so much about some billionaire he'd never met." Emily paused. "When I listened to the recording and heard Hayes talking about the crash, about my father taking the blame, everything made sense." Vance was writing quickly, her pen scratching across the page. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately?" "Because I didn't know if anyone would believe me. The case was closed 25 years ago. My father pleaded guilty. He served his time, and Nathaniel Hayes is one of the most powerful men in the country." Emily met Vance's eyes. "I needed more than just the recording. I needed context. I needed people to see who he really was." "So you got a job at the Obsidian Club?" "Yes." "How did you know Hayes would be there?" "He's there every month, first Wednesday, private vault room. It's in his assistant's calendar, which she posts publicly on LinkedIn. Without realizing it, includes meeting locations." Emily shrugged. "Rich people aren't as careful as they think." Vance almost smiled. "Almost." "The things you said in the video," she continued, "about the other people in the room, Victor Castellano, Rebecca Whitmore, the others. Do you have evidence to support those claims?" Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Everything I overheard in 6 months," she said, setting it on the desk. "Recorded conversations, photographs of documents they left on tables, screenshots of emails they discussed openly. It's all there." Vance stared at the flash drive like it might explode. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes." "No, I don't think you do." Vance leaned back in her chair. "Half the people in that video are currently being represented by lawyers who cost more per hour than most people make in a month. They're going to argue entrapment, illegal recording, violation of privacy. They're going to try to bury you in litigation until you can't afford to fight back. Let them try. This isn't a movie, Ms. Carter. You can't just—" "My father spent 12 years in prison for something he didn't do," Emily said, her voice level. 12 years. And when he got out, he had nothing. No money, no future, no justice. Just a criminal record and a family that barely recognized him." She leaned forward. "So yes, I know what I've done. I've made sure that the man responsible can't hide anymore. And if that means getting buried in lawsuits, fine. At least people know the truth." Vance was quiet for a long moment. "The recording," she said finally. "We'll need the original phone, and we'll need to verify its authenticity. Hayes' lawyers are already claiming it's fabricated." "It's not." "I believe you, but belief isn't evidence." Vance pulled out a form and slid it across the desk. "I need you to sign this. It's a chain of custody agreement. Once you hand over that phone, it becomes evidence in an active investigation. You won't get it back." Emily looked at the form. Her father's voice was on that phone. The last piece of him that felt real, that felt like proof he'd existed as more than just a name in court documents. She signed the form. "There's something else you should know," Vance said. "We've been contacted by a woman named Claire Mendez. She says she was in the car with Nathaniel Hayes the night of the crash." Emily's pulse quickened. "She's willing to testify?" "She says she is, but she's terrified. Hayes' family paid her off years ago to keep quiet. If she talks now, she's admitting to obstruction of justice, accepting a bribe, perjury. She could face charges." "Will she?" Vance hesitated. "That depends on what she tells us, and how cooperative she is." She closed her legal pad. I'm going to be honest with you, Ms. Carter. This case is going to be complicated. The original investigation was closed. Your father's guilty plea is on record. Even with the recording and a witness, a good defense attorney could argue that it's all circumstantial, that memories fade, that recordings can be manipulated. But it's enough to reopen the investigation? It's enough to start asking questions. Vance stood up, which is more than we had yesterday. Emily left the DA's office just after noon. The moment she stepped outside, 3 reporters rushed toward her with cameras and microphones. Emily, how does it feel to expose Nathaniel Hayes? Are you worried about retaliation? Did you plan this for revenge? She pushed past them without answering and kept walking until she found a coffee shop 2 blocks away. It was crowded and loud, which was exactly what she needed. She ordered black coffee and found a seat in the corner, away from the windows. Then, finally, she turned on her phone. The notifications came in waves: texts, emails, missed calls, voicemails. She scrolled through them quickly, deleting most without reading, but one message made her stop. It was from a number she didn't recognize, sent at 4 a.m. You don't know what you've started. This isn't over. No name, no signature. Emily deleted it and kept scrolling. Another message, this one from a journalist at Bloomberg. Hayes Global stock down 34% in pre-market trading. Board calling emergency meeting. Sources say Hayes is being forced out as CEO. Good. Then another text, this one from Marcus, the floor manager at the Obsidian Club. They fired me. Said I should have stopped you, like I could have known what you were planning. Thanks for that. Emily stared at the message. She'd known there would be collateral damage. She'd known people would get hurt who didn't deserve it. She typed back, I'm sorry. Marcus's response came immediately. No, you're not. He was right. She wasn't. The coffee shop door opened and Emily glanced up out of habit. A man walked in. Expensive suit, graying hair, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He scanned the room, and when his eyes landed on Emily, he walked straight toward her. Emily Carter? She didn't answer. He sat down across from her anyway. My name is Richard Bowen, he said. I'm an attorney with Kirkland & Ellis. I represent Nathaniel Hayes. Emily took a sip of her coffee. You should leave. I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. What happened to your father was a tragedy, but what you did last night, that was illegal. You recorded private conversations without consent. You made defamatory statements about innocent people. You caused significant financial harm to my client and others. Your client killed 3 people and let my father go to prison for it. That's an allegation, not a proven fact. Bowen folded his hands on the table. Here's what's going to happen. My client is willing to make this right. We'll compensate you for your father's lost wages, pain and suffering, legal fees. We're talking about a substantial settlement, enough that you'd never have to work again. I don't want his money. Then what do you want, justice? Bowen leaned back. Because if you think justice is watching Nathaniel Hayes go to prison, you're going to be disappointed. The recording you have is 25 years old. Chain of custody is questionable. Your father pleaded guilty in open court. No jury is going to convict based on what you've presented. We'll see. Ms. Carter, be realistic. You're a waitress with no legal training, no resources, going up against one of the most powerful men in the country. You had your moment of glory. You embarrassed him. You cost him his reputation. Congratulations. But now it's time to accept reality. Emily set down her coffee cup. Let me tell you what's going to happen, she said quietly. Your client is going to be arrested. The DA is reopening the case. There's a witness who's willing to testify, and that recording you think is inadmissible? It's already been heard by millions of people. Even if it doesn't hold up in court, everyone knows what he did. Public opinion is everything. Emily stood up. Your client built his empire on a lie. Now everyone knows, and no amount of money can fix that. She walked out, leaving Bowen sitting alone at the table. By the time Emily made it back to her apartment in Queens, the story had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. The New York Times had published a long-form investigation into the original crash, interviewing witnesses who remembered seeing a young Nathaniel Hayes at the party that night, drunk and belligerent. The Washington Post had obtained court documents showing that Hayes's father had made a substantial donation to the district attorney's re-election campaign 2 weeks before Thomas Carter pleaded guilty. On Twitter, #Justice. For Thomas Carter was trending alongside #Nathaniel Hayes. People were posting photos of Emily's father, articles about wrongful convictions, stories about their own experiences with corrupt wealthy people who'd escaped consequences. Some of the responses were supportive. Others were vicious. She's just doing this for attention. Gold digger trying to cash in on a tragedy. If this was really about justice, she would have gone to the police first, not social media. Emily had expected that. She'd known that some people would never believe her, no matter how much evidence she presented. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the conversation had started. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Miss Carter, this is Claire Mendez. Emily sat down on her couch. I saw your video, Claire continued. Her voice was shaky, like she was forcing herself to speak. I was there that night, in the car. I've been carrying this for 25 years, and I want to help. Are you willing to testify? I think so. I don't know. I'm scared. A pause. He told me that if I ever talked, he'd destroy me. That his family had enough money and power to make me disappear. And I believed him. I was 19 years old and I believed him. You're not 19 anymore. No, but I'm still scared. Emily understood that. Fear didn't just disappear because you wanted it to. The DA wants to talk to you, she said. Her name is Sarah Vance. She can protect you. Can she? Claire's voice cracked. Can she really protect me from Nathaniel Hayes? Emily thought about that question. About power and money and the systems designed to protect people who had both. I don't know, she said honestly. But I know that staying silent didn't protect you either. It just meant carrying the weight alone. Claire was quiet for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Tell me how to reach her. Emily gave her Vance's contact information, and they hung up. She sat in her apartment as the afternoon light faded, watching the city through her window. Somewhere out there, Nathaniel Hayes was probably in a crisis meeting with his lawyers and PR team, trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of his reputation. Somewhere else, Claire Mendez was probably staring at her phone, working up the courage to make a call that would change everything. And somewhere in a courthouse, files were being pulled, evidence logged, a case reopened after 25 years. The system moved slowly. Emily had learned that a long time ago. But it was moving. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a number she didn't recognize. You should watch the news. Emily turned on the TV. Every channel was covering the same story. Nathaniel Hayes, flanked by lawyers, walking out of his office building and into a crowd of reporters. Cameras flashing, questions shouting over each other. Mr. Hayes, do you have any comment on the allegations? Are you stepping down as CEO? Did you kill that family? Hayes kept his head down, his expression blank. One of his lawyers raised a hand. Mr. Hayes will not be making any statements at this time, the lawyer said. These allegations are false and defamatory, and we will be pursuing all legal remedies available. What about the recording? The alleged recording has not been authenticated and may very well be fabricated. We are conducting our own investigation. They pushed through the crowd and got into a black SUV. As the vehicle pulled away, the camera zoomed in on Hayes through the tinted window. For just a moment, he looked directly at the camera, and Emily could see it in his eyes. Fear. The next morning, Emily met with her father's old public defender in a small office in Brooklyn. His name was David Park, and he looked exactly like someone who'd spent 30 years fighting losing battles in criminal court, tired, cynical, but still showing up anyway. I tried to get your father to fight the charges, Park said, shuffling through files on his desk. He wouldn't do it. Kept saying he'd made his choice, that he had to protect his family. I told him that pleading guilty to vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated was going to ruin his life. He said his life was already ruined, and at least this way you and your mother would be taken care of. Except we weren't. No, you weren't. Park found the file he was looking for and opened it. I've been trying to get this case reopened for 10 years. Every time I got shut down. No new evidence. Original plea was voluntary. Case closed. He looked up at Emily. What you did changes everything. Can we get his conviction overturned? Maybe. It's going to depend on what the DA finds when they reinvestigate. If Claire Mendez testifies, if the recording holds up, if we can prove that Hayes' family coerced your father into taking the plea, then yes, we have a shot. Park closed the file. But even if we win, your father is gone. An overturned conviction doesn't bring him back. I know. Then why do this? Why risk everything for a symbolic victory? Emily thought about her father, the way he'd looked the last time she'd visited him in the hospital. His skin gray, his eyes hollow. The way he'd held her hand and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't give you more." Like he was the one who'd failed. "It's not symbolic," she said. "It's the truth, and he deserved to have the truth told." Park nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's get to work." They spent the next 3 hours going through files, building a timeline, identifying witnesses who might still be alive and willing to talk. By the time Emily left Park's office, it was dark outside. She was exhausted. She hadn't slept more than a few hours in the last 2 days. Her body ached. Her mind felt like it was running on fumes. But she couldn't stop yet. There was still more to do. The emails she'd sent the night before had started to get responses. Victor Castellanos' lawyers had sent a cease and desist letter, threatening litigation if she didn't retract her statements immediately. Rebecca Whitmore hadn't responded at all, but according to Bloomberg, she'd resigned from her hedge fund to spend more time with family. James Chen had sent a personal email. "You don't know what you're talking about, but if you want to discuss this privately, I'm willing to listen." Translation: he wanted to negotiate. Emily deleted it. Senator Patricia Morrison's office had released a statement denying all allegations and announcing an ethics investigation to clear her name. One by one, the people in that room were reacting exactly as Emily had predicted. Deny, deflect, lawyer up. But the damage was done. The public was watching now. Journalists were digging. Whistleblowers were coming forward with their own stories about corruption and abuse of power. Emily had lit a match. Now the fire was spreading on its own. She got home just after 8 p.m., ordered takeout she was too tired to eat, and fell asleep on her couch with her phone still in her hand. She woke up to someone pounding on her door. Emily sat up, disoriented. It was still dark outside. Her phone said 2:47 a.m. The pounding came again. Harder this time. "NYPD, open up!" Her heart jumped into her throat. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 officers stood in the hallway, both in uniform. Emily unlocked the door and opened it part way. "Emily Carter?" one of the officers asked. "Yes. We need you to come with us." "What? Why?" "There's been an incident. We need to ask you some questions." Emily's mind raced. "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time, but we need you to come to the station. I want to call a lawyer first." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Ma'am, this is urgent. Someone broke into Nathaniel Hayes' home tonight. His daughter was there. She's okay, but Mr. Hayes is claiming you might have information about who did this." Emily went cold. "I didn't break into anyone's home." "We're not saying you did, but given your history with Mr. Hayes, we need to establish your whereabouts tonight. Just routine questions." Nothing about this felt routine, but Emily grabbed her jacket and went with them anyway. The interrogation room was exactly like the ones on TV. Gray walls, metal table, mirror that was obviously two-way glass. Emily sat alone for 20 minutes before anyone came in. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a detective, it was Nathaniel Hayes. He looked different than he had in the vault room. His suit was rumpled, his hair messy. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept, who'd been running on rage and adrenaline for too long. "You're not supposed to be in here," Emily said. "I know." He closed the door behind him. "I told them I needed to talk to you, that it was urgent." "There's nothing to talk about." "Someone broke into my home tonight," Nathaniel said. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it Emily could hear something fraying. "They got past security, disabled the alarm, and went straight to my daughter's room." Emily's stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. Terrified, but fine. They didn't touch her, just left a note on her bed." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. It said, "Now you know how it feels." Emily stared at the note. The handwriting was blocky, unfamiliar. "I didn't do this," she said. "I know." That surprised her. You were on camera at your building all evening, Nathaniel continued. The timeline doesn't work. But someone who saw your video, someone who thinks they're helping you, decided to take things further. So now my 6-year-old daughter is sleeping at my lawyer's house because she's too scared to be in her own room. I'm sorry that happened to her, but that's not my fault. Isn't it? Nathaniel leaned forward. You wanted to destroy me. Fine. I probably deserve it, but my daughter doesn't. She didn't do anything except have the wrong father. Emily met his eyes. My father didn't do anything either, except trust yours. They stared at each other across the table. I was 19, Nathaniel said finally. Drunk, stupid, scared. I made a choice that night that I've regretted every day since. Not enough to tell the truth. No, not enough for that. He ran a hand through his hair. You want me to say I'm a monster? Fine, I'm a monster. I let an innocent man go to prison. I built my life on his sacrifice. I'm guilty of everything you said and worse. So turn yourself in. I can't. You mean you won't? I mean I can't. Nathaniel's voice cracked slightly. If I go to prison, what happens to my daughter? Her mother is dead. She has no other family. I'm all she has. Emily thought about that. About a little girl who'd already lost her mother, now watching her father's world collapse on live television. You should have thought about that before you killed 3 people, she said. Nathaniel flinched like she'd hit him. You're right, he said quietly. I should have. He stood up and walked to the door. Before he opened it, he turned back. The recording, he said. Is it real? Yes. And there's no way to make this go away? No. Nathaniel nodded slowly, like he'd already known the answer but needed to hear it anyway. Then I guess we both get to live with the consequences, he said. And he left. Emily left the police station at dawn. The city was just starting to wake up, delivery trucks rumbling through empty streets, the first commuters stumbling toward subway stations with coffee cups clutched like lifelines. She hadn't been charged with anything. The detectives had asked their questions, confirmed her alibi, and let her go with a warning to be careful about the kind of attention her video was attracting, as if she could control that now. Her phone had 17 new voicemails. She deleted them without listening. Whatever people wanted from her, interviews, statements, apologies, could wait. She needed sleep. Real sleep, more than the fragmented hours she'd been grabbing between crises. But when she got back to her apartment, there was someone waiting in the hallway. A woman, late 40s, dressed in jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. She had the kind of face that had once been beautiful, but had been worn down by years of something heavy. Emily Carter? The woman asked. Emily's hand tightened on her keys. Who are you? My name is Linda Morrison. I need to talk to you about your father. Emily didn't move. Did you know him? No, but I knew someone who did. Linda glanced down the hallway like she was checking to make sure they were alone. Can we go inside? I don't want to do this out here. Every instinct told Emily to say no. She'd already let too many strangers into her life in the past 48 hours. But something about the way Linda was standing, shoulders hunched, hands shaking slightly, made her pause. 5 minutes, Emily said, unlocking her door. Inside, Linda sat on the edge of the couch like she might need to run at any moment. Emily stayed standing, arms crossed. Talk, she said. Linda took a breath. My husband worked for Hayes Industries back in the 90s. He was in accounting, same department as your father. They weren't friends exactly, but they knew each other, ate lunch together sometimes. Okay. After your father went to prison, my husband started asking questions. He thought something didn't add up about the whole thing. Thomas Carter wasn't a drinker. Everyone in the office knew that. So why would he suddenly get drunk and cause a fatal accident? Linda's hands twisted together in her lap. My husband started digging, looking at records, talking to people who'd been at that party in the Hamptons, and he found something. Emily sat down. What did he find? Receipts. From the bar at the country club where the party was held. Someone had run up a tab that night under a fake name, but the credit card used to close it belonged to Nathaniel Hayes. The receipts showed what he'd been drinking, 8 drinks in 3 hours. Way over the legal limit. Did your husband go to the police? He tried. They told him the case was closed, that they weren't interested in conspiracy theories. Linda's voice went quiet. 2 weeks later, he was fired. No warning, no explanation, just a security escort out of the building and a severance check. Jesus. He couldn't find another job, not in finance, not in New York. It was like he'd been blacklisted. We lost our apartment, our savings, everything. Linda looked up at Emily, and her eyes were wet. He killed himself 6 years ago, walked into the Hudson River and didn't come back. The apartment went silent except for the sound of traffic outside. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. Another life destroyed. Another family broken by Nathaniel Hayes' lies. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "I saw your video," Linda continued, "and I realized my husband was right all along. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't paranoid. He just saw the truth before anyone else did." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are copies of the receipts he found, and some other documents he'd collected. I don't know if they'll help, but I thought you should have them." Emily took the envelope. It was thick, stuffed with papers. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to end up like my husband." Linda stood up. "But then I watched you walk into that club and tell the truth in front of all those powerful people, and I thought, maybe it's time to stop being scared." She headed toward the door, then paused. "Your father was a good man," she said. "My husband always said that. Thomas Carter was decent, honest, the kind of person who didn't deserve what happened to him." "Thank you," Emily said. After Linda left, Emily sat on her couch and opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of documents, credit card receipts, like Linda had said, but also internal memos from Hayes Industries, emails printed on faded paper, handwritten notes that looked like someone trying to piece together a puzzle. One email, dated 3 months after Thomas Carter went to prison, stood out. From Robert Hayes Sr., Chairman. To Michael Vance, General Counsel. Carter situation. The matter is resolved. TC has accepted responsibility and will not be causing any further complications. Ensure all documentation related to the incident is archived and sealed. No one outside of legal should have access. Regarding his compensation package, hold the payments until he completes his sentence. If he talks, we have leverage. If he stays quiet, we honor the agreement. Either way, this ends here. Emily read it 3 times. Proof, clear, documented proof, that Hayes Industries had made a deal with her father, that they'd promised him compensation in exchange for his silence, and then they'd reneged. She pulled out her phone and called Sarah Vance. The ADA answered on the second ring. "Carter, I was just about to call you." "I have more evidence," Emily said. "Documents showing that Hayes Industries made a financial agreement with my father in exchange for taking the blame. Bring them to my office. Today." Vance paused. "But first you need to know something. Claire Mendez came in this morning. She gave a full statement." Emily's heart jumped. "And?" "And it corroborates everything on the recording. She was in the car. Hayes was driving. He was drunk. After the crash, he called his father, and they came up with the plan to blame your dad. Claire says she was paid $50,000 to disappear and never mention it again." "That's huge." "It is. But there's a problem." Vance's voice tightened. "Hayes' lawyers are claiming that Claire is only coming forward now because she's being paid by someone to fabricate testimony. They're saying you hired her." "That's bullshit." "I know it is. But they're going to argue it anyway. They're going to try to discredit both of you, paint this as a revenge plot, a shakedown, whatever narrative they can sell." Vance sighed. "Emily, I need you to understand something. We're going up against people who have unlimited resources. They're going to fight this with everything they have." "Good. So will we." When Emily arrived at the DA's office an hour later, there were protesters outside the building. Not many, maybe 20 people, holding signs and chanting slogans. Half of them were pro-Emily. Justice for Thomas Carter, and billionaires aren't above the law. The other half were pro-Hayes, innocent until proven guilty, and stop the witch hunt. Emily kept her head down and walked through them quickly. Inside, Vance was waiting with 2 other attorneys and a forensic accountant who introduced herself as Dr. Rachel Kim. They spread the documents Emily had brought across a conference table and started going through them systematically. "This is incredible," Dr. Kim said, examining the email from Robert Hayes Sr. "This shows intent to obstruct justice. It shows a conspiracy to cover up the original crime. Can we use it in court? Emily asked. Depends on how we obtained it, one of the other attorneys said. His name was Marcus Liu, and he had the kind of intense focus that made Emily think he didn't sleep much. If these documents were stolen, they weren't, Emily interrupted. They were given to me by the widow of a man who worked at Hayes Industries. He collected them as part of his own investigation before he was fired. Do we have proof of that? Linda Morrison. I can give you her contact information. Vance made a note. We'll need to interview her, get her full statement on record. They worked for hours, building timelines, cross-referencing dates, identifying potential witnesses who might still be alive and could testify about the cover-up. By mid-afternoon, they had the outline of a case. Here's where we are, Vance said, standing at the whiteboard where she'd mapped everything out. We have the original recording of Hayes admitting to the crime and asking your father to take the fall. We have testimony from Claire Mendez, an eyewitness who was in the car. We have these documents showing a financial arrangement between Hayes Industries and your father, and we have evidence of retaliation against anyone who questioned the official story. So we can prosecute? Emily asked. We can try, but we're still fighting an uphill battle. Vance tapped the whiteboard. The statute of limitations for vehicular manslaughter is typically 5 to 10 years, depending on the state. This happened 25 years ago. Emily felt her stomach drop. So he gets away with it? Not necessarily. Murder has no statute of limitations. If we can prove that Hayes didn't just cause the deaths through negligence, but that there was intent or reckless disregard for human life, we might be able to charge him with second-degree murder. And the cover-up? Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy, bribery, those all have their own statutes of limitations, but some of them extend longer. And if we can prove that Hayes and his associates actively concealed evidence and intimidated witnesses, we might be able to argue continuing conspiracy, which resets the clock. Marcus Liu leaned forward. The bigger issue is going to be your father's guilty plea. That's going to be the cornerstone of Hayes' defense. They'll argue that Thomas Carter confessed in open court, that he had legal representation, that his conviction was legitimate. Overturning that is going to require extraordinary evidence. We have extraordinary evidence, Emily said. We have good evidence, Vance corrected, but good isn't always enough. Emily wanted to throw something. After everything she'd done, everything she'd risked, the idea that Hayes might still walk free made her want to scream. So what do we do? She asked. We keep building the case. We interview every possible witness. We subpoena records from Hayes Industries. We find every piece of evidence that supports the truth. Vance met her eyes, and we prepare for a long fight. The press conference was Vance's idea. If we're going to do this, we need public support, she'd said. Hayes is going to use his money and influence to bury this. But if people are watching, if they're invested in seeing justice done, that makes it harder for him to make this go away quietly. Emily hated the idea. She'd never wanted to be the face of this story. She just wanted her father's name cleared. But Vance was right. Public pressure was one of the few advantages they had. So 3 days after Emily had walked out of the Obsidian Club, she stood behind a podium in front of a dozen cameras and twice as many reporters. Vance spoke first, laying out the evidence they'd gathered, explaining the timeline of the cover-up, announcing that the Manhattan DA's office was officially reopening the investigation into the 2001 crash that killed Michael and Sarah Chen and their daughter Lisa. Then it was Emily's turn. She'd written notes, but when she looked down at them, the words blurred together. So she spoke from memory instead. My father's name was Thomas Carter, she began. He was an accountant. He loved crossword puzzles and bad coffee and watching baseball even though he didn't really understand the rules. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. But he was a good man. Her voice was steady. She'd practiced this part. 25 years ago, he made a choice to protect his family. He was told that if he took responsibility for a crime he didn't commit, we would be taken care of. That his sacrifice would mean something. Emily paused. It didn't. We got nothing, and he lost everything. The cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. For years, I thought he was guilty. I thought he'd killed those people, that he destroyed our family through his own weakness. It wasn't until after he died that I learned the truth. Emily looked directly into the cameras. Nathaniel Hayes killed Michael, Sarah, and Lisa Chen. He was drunk. He was driving recklessly. And when he realized what he'd done, instead of taking responsibility, he used his family's money and power to make an innocent man pay for his crime. Someone in the crowd shouted a question, but Vance held up a hand. "We'll take questions after Ms. Carter finishes," she said. Emily glanced at her notes again, then set them aside. "I'm not here because I want revenge," she said. "I'm here because I want the truth to matter. I want people to know that you can't buy your way out of murder, that money and power don't put you above the law." She took a breath. "My father died believing he was a criminal. He died in shame, and I can't bring him back, but I can make sure that history remembers him correctly. Not as the man who caused that crash, but as the man who was sacrificed to protect someone who didn't deserve protection." She stepped back from the podium. The reporters erupted with questions, all talking over each other. "Emily, what do you say to people who claim you fabricated the evidence? Are you concerned about retaliation from Hayes? Do you think justice is still possible after 25 years? Vance fielded most of the questions, but one reporter pushed forward and directed a question straight at Emily. "Ms. Carter, there are reports that you've received multiple offers for book deals and movie rights. Are you profiting from this tragedy?" Emily felt her jaw tighten. "I haven't accepted any offers," she said. "This isn't about money." "But you're not ruling it out?" "I'm not thinking about it. Right now I'm focused on making sure my father's name is cleared and that Nathaniel Hayes is held accountable." Another reporter jumped in. "Hayes's lawyers have released a statement claiming you're mentally unstable and that this is all a delusion brought on by grief. How do you respond?" Emily almost laughed. Of course they'd try that angle. "I have evidence," she said simply. "They have excuses." The press conference ended 20 minutes later. Emily walked out through a back exit to avoid the crowd and found Linda Morrison waiting near her car. "You did good in there," Linda said. "Thanks for coming." "I wanted to see it. Wanted to see someone finally call these people out." Linda hesitated. "The DA wants to interview me next week about my husband, about the documents he found. Are you okay with that?" "I'm terrified, but I'm doing it anyway." She smiled weakly. "You kind of inspired me." After Linda left, Emily sat in her car for a long time, watching people walk past on the sidewalk. Normal people, living normal lives, probably not thinking about billionaires or cover-ups or justice. She envied them. Her phone rang. Unknown number again. She considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Hello? Is this Emily Carter?" A man's voice. Older, formal. "Who is this?" "My name is Judge Harold Whitman. I presided over your father's case 25 years ago." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "I saw the press conference," Whitman continued. "I saw the evidence you've presented, and I wanted to tell you that I believe you." "Okay, more than that, I want to help. I've gone back through the records from that trial, and there are irregularities I didn't notice at the time. Or maybe I did notice and chose to ignore them. I'm not proud of that." He paused. "Your father's attorney filed multiple motions for continuance, claiming his client needed more time to prepare. All of them were denied. The trial moved forward unusually quickly for a case of that magnitude." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think I was pressured to rush the proceedings. I received several calls from influential people suggesting that a quick resolution would be in everyone's best interest. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now," Whitman sighed, "now I wonder if I allowed an innocent man to be convicted because it was convenient for powerful people." Emily didn't know what to say. "I've prepared an affidavit," Whitman said, "detailing everything I remember about the case and the pressure I received. I'm submitting it to the DA's office tomorrow. It won't undo what happened, but it might help you prove that your father's trial was compromised." "Thank you," Emily managed. "Don't thank me. I should have done this years ago." Whitman's voice was heavy. "Your father deserved better. From the system, from me, from everyone who failed him." After he hung up, Emily sat in the silence of her car and let herself cry. Not from sadness, from something else. Relief, maybe, or validation. All these years she'd wondered if she was wrong about her father, if maybe he really had been guilty, and she was just in denial. Now she knew. She'd been right all along. The next week moved in a blur. More witnesses came forward, a bartender from the Hamptons Country Club who remembered serving Nathaniel Hayes that night. A former Hayes Industries employee who'd been told to destroy files related to the crash. A traffic analyst who reviewed the accident report and found inconsistencies in the official account. Piece by piece, the case was building, but so was the opposition. Hayes's legal team launched a full counteroffensive. They held their own press conference, presenting character witnesses who testified to Nathaniel's integrity. They released records showing charitable donations and community service. They produced experts who questioned the authenticity of the recording and the reliability of witnesses testifying about events from 25 years ago. On cable news, pundits debated the case endlessly. "This is a clear case of vigilante justice," one commentator argued. Emily Carter took the law into her own hands, destroyed a man's reputation without due process, and now she's trying to justify it after the fact. "Are you serious?" Another shot back. "She exposed a murderer who's been living free for 25 years while an innocent man rotted in prison. How is that vigilante justice? That's just justice." The arguments went in circles. Half the country seemed to think Emily was a hero. The other half thought she was a criminal. Emily stopped watching the news. Instead, she focused on what she could control, meeting with lawyers, reviewing evidence, preparing for what everyone kept telling her would be a long, brutal legal battle. And then, on a Friday afternoon 2 weeks after the video went viral, Sarah Vance called with news. "We're charging him," she said. "Grand jury came back with an indictment this morning. Second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy. 8 counts total." Emily's breath caught. "When?" "Arrest warrant is being executed now." Emily turned on her TV. Live footage showed federal agents and NYPD officers outside Hayes Global headquarters. The building was surrounded. People were being escorted out with their hands up. And then, there he was, Nathaniel Hayes, walking out in handcuffs, surrounded by agents. His lawyers were shouting, trying to get statements from the officers. Reporters were pressed against police barriers, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Hayes looked smaller somehow, diminished. Not the powerful CEO who'd smirked at a waitress and thought he could control the narrative. Just a man who'd finally run out of places to hide. The footage cut to a reporter standing outside the courthouse. Nathaniel Hayes is being arraigned this afternoon on multiple charges related to a fatal car crash from 2001. If convicted, he faces up to 25 years to life in prison. This is a stunning fall from grace for one of the country's most prominent business leaders. Emily muted the TV. Her phone was ringing again. Journalists wanting reactions, supporters offering congratulations, strangers who'd somehow gotten her number and wanted to share their opinions. She ignored all of it. Instead, she got in her car and drove to Queens. The cemetery was quiet. Late afternoon sun filtering through bare trees. A few other people scattered among the graves, but mostly Emily was alone. Her father's headstone was simple. Just his name, his dates, and the words, "beloved father and husband." No mention of the crime he'd supposedly committed. Emily's mother had insisted on that. Emily sat down on the grass next to the grave. "They arrested him," she said quietly. "Hayes, this morning. It's really happening." The wind rustled through the trees. "I know this doesn't change anything for you. You're still gone. And I'm sorry I didn't figure this out while you were alive. I'm sorry you died thinking you'd failed us." Emily pulled some dead leaves away from the base of the headstone. "Mom says I should let it go. That dragging all this up is just going to hurt everyone, including me. Maybe she's right. But I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let your name stay ruined when you didn't deserve it." She stayed there for a long time, not really thinking, just being present in the quiet. Eventually, she stood up, brushed the grass off her jeans, and headed back to her car. On the drive home, her phone rang again. This time, it was Vance. "Hayes made bail," she said without preamble. "Posted $5 million and walked out an hour ago." Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How?" "He's got money, and despite the charges, the judge deemed him not a flight risk. He's got a daughter, community ties, no prior record. He's a murderer. Allegedly. Until a jury convicts him." Vance sighed. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but the arraignment is just the beginning. The trial is where we'll get justice." "When?" "Months from now. Maybe longer. These things take time." Emily ended the call and drove the rest of the way home in silence. Justice, she was learning, wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a video going viral or an arrest being made. It was a process. Long, slow, frustrating. And she was just getting started. The waiting was worse than anything Emily had imagined. 5 months passed between Nathaniel Hayes' arrest and the start of the trial. 5 months of motions and counter-motions, of evidence being challenged and witnesses being deposed, of Hayes' legal team doing everything possible to delay, deflect, and dismantle the case against him. Emily tried to live a normal life during that time. She picked up shifts at a different restaurant, not a private club this time, just a regular place in Brooklyn where the customers were mostly families, and the biggest drama was someone sending back overcooked pasta. But normal felt impossible when her face was still showing up on the news every few days, when strangers recognized her on the subway and either thanked her or called her a bitch, when her inbox was flooded with interview requests and book deals and marriage proposals from men she'd never met. She ignored most of it. What she couldn't ignore was her mother. Catherine Carter had called exactly once since the video went viral. The conversation had lasted less than 3 minutes. "What were you thinking?" her mother had said, her voice tight with something between anger and fear. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I told the truth." "You destroyed our lives, again." Catherine's breath had hitched. "Your father made his choice 25 years ago so we could move on, and now you've dragged it all back up, put our family on display for the whole world to judge." "Dad's choice wasn't a choice. He was coerced. It doesn't matter, it's over. He's gone. And you've accomplished nothing except making yourself a target." Emily had tried to explain, tried to make her mother understand that clearing their father's name mattered, that justice mattered, but Catherine had hung up before she could finish. They hadn't spoken since. Emily told herself it didn't hurt, that her mother was just scared, just protecting herself the way she'd always done. But it did hurt. It hurt like hell. In early March, Sarah Vance called with an update. "Trial starts April 15th, she said. Judge Marianne Kowalski presiding. She's tough but fair. Hayes' team tried to get her recused, claimed she had a bias against wealthy defendants. Motion was denied." "What are our chances?" Emily asked. Vance was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, 50-50. We have good evidence, but Hayes has an incredible defense team. Martin Schaffer is lead counsel. He's never lost a murder case. Never. He's going to attack every piece of evidence we present, discredit every witness. It's going to be brutal." "I can handle brutal." "I know you can, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we lose, that a jury hears everything and still decides there's reasonable doubt." Emily stared out her window at the street below. "If that happens, then at least people know the truth. At least it's on the record." "That's a very generous way to look at it." "I don't feel generous. I feel tired." "Yeah," Vance said quietly. "Me too." The night before the trial started, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed scrolling through news articles about the case, reading comments from people who had strong opinions about her, about Hayes, about the justice system. Some of the comments were supportive, others were vicious in ways that made her chest tight. "She's just a gold digger who saw an opportunity. My cousin went to Yale with Nate Hayes and says he's the nicest guy. This is all fake. Even if it's true, what's the point of dragging up something from 25 years ago? Let it go." Emily closed the browser and put her phone face down on the nightstand. She thought about her father, tried to remember what his voice had sounded like, what his laugh had sounded like. The memories were getting hazier. That scared her more than anything else, the idea that one day she'd forget completely, that he'd become just a story she told instead of a person she'd known. At 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee. She was sitting at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Good luck tomorrow." "You're doing the right thing." No name, no context. Emily stared at it for a long time, then deleted it and went back to her coffee. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters when Emily arrived the next morning. There were more of them than there had been at the DA's office. Maybe 100 people on each side, separated by police barriers, and a line of officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Justice for Thomas Carter," one group chanted. "Free Nathaniel Hayes," the other group shouted back. Emily pushed through them with her head down, flanked by 2 attorneys from the DA's office, who'd been assigned to help her navigate the circus. Inside, the courthouse was quieter but no less tense. Journalists filled the benches. Sketch artists sat with their pads ready. In the front row on the right side, Emily spotted a woman she recognized from photographs, Nathaniel Hayes' sister, looking pale and furious. Emily took her seat behind the prosecution table. Sarah Vance was already there, reviewing notes. She glanced up when Emily sat down. "You okay?" Vance asked. "No, but I'm here." "That's all that matters." The bailiff called for everyone to rise, and Judge Kowalski entered. She was in her early 60s, gray hair cut short, the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Be seated," she said, settling into her chair. "Let's get started." Nathaniel Hayes was led in a moment later. He wasn't in handcuffs this time. He wore a dark suit, white shirt, no tie. His hair was neatly trimmed. He looked tired but composed, nothing like the shaking, desperate man who'd confronted Emily at the police station months ago. His lead attorney, Martin Schaffer, sat beside him. Schaffer was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of courtroom victories. He didn't look worried. Emily's stomach twisted. Judge Kowalski reviewed some preliminary matters, then addressed the jury pool. Jury selection took 2 days. Watching potential jurors being questioned felt like watching a psychological dissection. Schaffer's team eliminated anyone who seemed too sympathetic to Emily, anyone who'd posted about the case on social media, anyone who had strong opinions about wealth inequality. Vance's team did the same in reverse, eliminating anyone who seemed too deferential to authority, too skeptical of witness testimony, too willing to give Hayes the benefit of the doubt. In the end, they had 12 jurors and 4 alternates, 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from late 20s to early 70s. Emily tried to read their faces, tried to guess who might be on her side, but they all looked neutral. Carefully, professionally neutral. Opening statements began on a Wednesday morning. Schaffer went first. He stood in front of the jury box with his hands clasped, his voice calm and measured. 25 years ago, he began, a terrible tragedy occurred. 3 people lost their lives in a car accident. A family was destroyed. And in the aftermath, a man named Thomas Carter stepped forward and accepted responsibility for what happened. He pleaded guilty. He went to prison. He served his sentence. Schaffer paused, looking at each juror in turn. Now, a quarter century later, his daughter wants to rewrite history. She wants you to believe that her father was innocent, that he was coerced, that a vast conspiracy was orchestrated to protect a 19-year-old college student. She wants you to believe this based on a recording of questionable authenticity, the testimony of a woman who's been paid for her story, and documents that may or may not prove what she claims they prove. Emily's hands clenched in her lap. The prosecution will tell you this is about justice, Schaffer continued, but what this is really about is a daughter who can't accept her father's choices, who would rather believe in a conspiracy than accept the painful truth that her father caused a terrible accident and tried to make amends by taking responsibility. He walked back toward the defense table. My client, Nathaniel Hayes, is not a perfect man. He's made mistakes in his life, as we all have. But he did not commit murder. He did not orchestrate a cover-up. And when you've heard all the evidence, when you've seen the holes in the prosecution's case, I trust you'll recognize that this trial is not about justice. It's about revenge. Schaffer sat down. Judge Kowalski looked at Vance. Ms. Vance? Sarah Vance stood and approached the jury. She didn't have Schaffer's theatrical calm. She looked like what she was, an overworked prosecutor with too many cases and not enough sleep, fighting for something she believed in despite the odds. In 2001, Vance began, Michael Chen, Sarah Chen, and their 8-year-old daughter Lisa were driving home from a family gathering. They were hit by a drunk driver running a red light. All 3 died instantly. Her voice was steady, factual. The police investigation was quick, very quick. Within 48 hours, they had a suspect who confessed. Thomas Carter, an accountant with no prior record, no history of drinking problems, pled guilty to vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. Case closed. Vance pulled out a photograph and placed it on an easel facing the jury. It showed the crash scene, twisted metal, shattered glass, the kind of devastation that made you wonder how anyone survived. Except it wasn't Thomas Carter driving that night, she said. It was Nathaniel Hayes, 19 years old, drunk, scared of what his future would look like if he went to prison. So his father, Robert Hayes Sr., made a deal with Thomas Carter. Take the blame. Go to prison. and in exchange, your family will be taken care of financially. She pulled out another photograph. This one showed Thomas Carter on the day he was sentenced, younger than Emily remembered him, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Thomas Carter kept his end of the bargain. He went to prison. He served 12 years. And when he got out, the Hayes family reneged. No money, no support, nothing. Vance's voice hardened. But Thomas Carter had done one smart thing. Before he went to prison, he recorded a phone call with Nathaniel Hayes. A call where Hayes begged him to take the blame, promised him everything, admitted that he was the one driving. She pulled out a still image from Emily's video. Nathaniel in the vault room, his face caught in an expression that looked like guilt. The defense will tell you that recording is fake, that the witnesses are lying, that this is all a conspiracy. Vance shook her head. But the evidence doesn't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. And by the end of this trial, you'll know beyond any doubt that Nathaniel Hayes killed 3 people and let an innocent man pay for his crime. She walked back to her table and sat down. Judge Kowalski looked at both sides. Call your first witness, Ms. Vance. The prosecution's case unfolded over the next 3 weeks. Vance called Claire Mendez first. Claire took the stand looking terrified, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. Can you tell the jury where you were on the night of August 4th, 2001? Vance asked. I was at a party in the Hamptons, at a private estate. And how did you end up there? I was dating someone who knew the Hayes family. He brought me as his +1. Did you know Nathaniel Hayes before that night? We'd met a few times, just casually. What happened at the party? Claire took a shaky breath. Nathaniel was drinking. A lot. He kept doing shots with some of the other guys, getting louder, more aggressive. Around midnight, he said he was leaving. I'd had a fight with my boyfriend and wanted to get out of there, so I asked if I could catch a ride. And did you? Yes. We got in his car, a BMW, black. I remember because it was brand new and he kept talking about how much it cost. What happened next? He was driving too fast. I told him to slow down, but he just laughed. Said he knew these roads, that he could drive them drunk or sober, didn't matter. Claire's voice cracked. Then we came to an intersection. The light was red. I saw it turn red. I told him to stop, but he didn't. He just kept going. The courtroom was silent. And then? Vance prompted gently. Then we hit the other car. Right on the driver's side. The sound was, I can't even describe it, like the whole world was ending. Tears were running down Claire's face now. Nathaniel stopped the car about 50 feet past the intersection. He was panicking, saying, oh fuck, over and over. I looked back and saw the other car. It was completely destroyed. What did you do? I wanted to call 911, but Nathaniel grabbed my phone and threw it out the window. He said we couldn't stay, that if anyone found out he was driving drunk, his life would be over. He drove us back to the estate. And then what happened? He called his father. About an hour later, his father showed up with a lawyer. They took me into a room and told me that I needed to forget everything I'd seen, that if I told anyone, they'd make sure I regretted it. Claire wiped her eyes. They gave me $50,000 in cash and made me sign something saying I'd never speak about it. Did you take the money? Yes. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. I was 19, I was terrified, and I took the money. Vance nodded. Thank you, Ms. Mendez, no further questions. Schaffer stood for cross-examination. He didn't attack right away. He started gentle, almost sympathetic. Ms. Mendez, this must be very difficult for you. It is. You've been carrying this secret for 25 years. That's a long time. Yes. When did you decide to come forward? After I saw Emily's video, after I heard the recording. So you didn't feel compelled to tell the truth until you saw that Ms. Carter was making this public. I was scared before that. Scared of what exactly? The Hayes family? Did they threaten you recently? No, but in the past 25 years, has anyone from the Hayes family contacted you to maintain your silence? No. Have they threatened you? No, but I knew. You knew what, Miss Mendez? You knew that something you imagined might happen, even though it never did? Schaffer's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. Or did you know that coming forward now, when there's massive media attention, might be financially beneficial? I'm not being paid. Not directly, perhaps, but you've signed with a literary agent, haven't you, for a book deal? Claire's face flushed. That was after I agreed to testify. How much is the book deal worth? I'm not sure yet. Ballpark figure, Ms. Mendez. Are we talking 5 figures? 6? 7? Vance stood. Objection. Relevance. Goes to witness credibility, Your Honor, Schaffer said. I'll allow it, Judge Kowalski said. Answer the question, Ms. Mendez. The advance is $250,000, Claire said quietly. A murmur went through the courtroom. Schaffer nodded. $250,000 for a book about your version of events from a night 25 years ago. It's not a version. It's what happened. Is it? Because I have to wonder, Ms. Mendez, if your memory of that night might have been influenced by the recording you heard, by the media coverage, by the opportunity for financial gain. That's not... You said you were drinking at the party, correct? A little. How much is a little? I don't remember exactly. It was 25 years ago. So your memory is imperfect. About how much I drank, yes, but I remember the crash. Do you? Or do you remember what you've been told happened, what you've seen in news coverage, what you've constructed in your mind over 2.5 decades? Vance objected again. Judge Kowalski sustained it this time, but the damage was done. Emily could see it in the jurors' faces, doubt creeping in, questions forming. The cross-examination continued for another hour. By the time Schaffer finished, Claire looked exhausted and defeated. Emily wanted to hate her for taking the book deal, but she couldn't. Claire had made a choice 25 years ago, and she'd been living with it ever since. If she could profit from finally telling the truth, who was Emily to judge? The prosecution called more witnesses over the following days. The bartender from his Hamptons club, who testified that he'd served Nathaniel Hayes 8 drinks that night. I remember because he kept tipping in hundreds. Made my whole week. The forensic accountant who walked through the financial records showing payments from Hayes Industries to various shell companies, then traced those payments to accounts connected to Thomas Carter. Payments that were supposed to continue but stopped abruptly after 3 months. Judge Whitman, who testified about the pressure he'd received to expedite Thomas Carter's trial. Linda Morrison, who cried on the stand while talking about her husband's investigation and subsequent blacklisting. Each witness added another piece to the puzzle, but each one also got torn apart on cross-examination. The bartender admitted he couldn't be 100% certain it was Hayes he'd served. It was dark. He'd served hundreds of customers that summer. Memories fade. The accountant conceded that the financial trail, while suspicious, didn't definitively prove a bribery arrangement. Judge Whitman acknowledged that he couldn't prove the phone calls he'd received were directly from the Hayes family. They'd come from intermediaries, lawyers, people claiming to represent concerned parties. And Linda Morrison, for all her conviction, hadn't actually witnessed anything herself. She was testifying to what her dead husband had told her, which was hearsay, which Schaffer made sure the jury understood wasn't reliable evidence. By the time the prosecution rested, Emily felt hollowed out. They'd presented everything they had. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every document. But she couldn't tell if it was enough. The defense case began on a Monday in early May. Schaffer called character witnesses first. People who'd known Nathaniel Hayes for decades, who testified that he was honest, charitable, a devoted father. I've worked with Nate for 15 years, one executive said. I've never known him to lie about anything, not even small things. Then came the expert witnesses. A forensic audio analyst who testified that the recording Emily had presented showed signs of manipulation. There are digital artifacts suggesting editing. Portions may have been spliced together. Vance challenged him hard on cross-examination, getting him to admit he couldn't say definitively that the recording was fake, only that it showed some anomalies that could indicate chassetine or could indicate age and degradation of the original file. Then Schaffer called a retired police detective who'd worked the original crash investigation. Did you have any reason to doubt Thomas Carter's confession? Schaffer asked. No, he was cooperative, coherent, remorseful. He understood his rights. His attorney was present. Everything was by the book. Did anyone pressure you to close the case quickly? Absolutely not. We investigated thoroughly and followed the evidence where it led. Vance's cross-examination focused on the unusual speed of the investigation, 48 hours from crash to confession, but the detective held firm. Some cases are complicated, some are straightforward. This one was straightforward. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, Schaffer called his last witness. Nathaniel Hayes himself. The courtroom went completely silent as Hayes walked to the stand. He looked different than he had at the start of the trial. Thinner, older. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by something more human and more fragile. After being sworn in, he sat down and looked at Schaffer. "Mr. Hayes," Schaffer began, "did you drive the car that struck and killed Michael Chen, Sarah Chen, and Lisa Chen on August 4th, 2001? "No," Hayes said clearly. "I did not." "Were you at the party that night?" "Yes, I was." "Were you drinking?" "I'd had a few drinks earlier in the evening, but I wasn't drunk, and I didn't drive that night." "Do you know who did?" Hayes looked down at his hands. "Thomas Carter did. I was at the party when I got a call from him. He was hysterical, saying he'd been in an accident, that people were dead. He begged me not to tell anyone he'd called me, said he was going to turn himself in, but he needed to talk to someone first." Emily's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "Why would he call you?" Schaffer asked. "We knew each other. Not well, but we'd talked a few times when he came to my father's office. He knew I was around his daughter's age. I think he just needed to hear a voice, someone who wouldn't judge him." "And the recording Ms. Carter presented?" "I've listened to it. Parts of it are real, fragments of conversations I had with Thomas over the years. But it's been edited, taken out of context, made to sound like something it wasn't." Hayes looked at the jury. "I never asked him to take the blame. I never promised him money. That's not what happened." Schaffer nodded. "One final question, Mr. Hayes. Did you have anything to do with the death of Michael, Sarah, and Lisa Chen?" "No," Hayes said, his voice breaking slightly. "And I've spent 25 years wishing I could have done something to prevent it, but I didn't cause it. Thomas Carter did." Schaffer sat down. Vance stood for cross-examination. She approached slowly, carrying a folder. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "you testified that you'd had a few drinks that night. How many is a few? 2, maybe 3. The bartender testified that you had 8 drinks. Was he lying?" "He was mistaken." "Mistaken by 5 or 6 drinks?" "It was 25 years ago. Memories aren't perfect." "Yet you remember the exact number of drinks you had?" "I remember that I wasn't drunk." Vance pulled out a credit card receipt and handed it to Hayes. "Is this your signature?" Hayes looked at it. "Yes." "This receipt shows 8 drinks charged to your credit card at the country club bar between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on August 4th, 2001. Were you buying drinks for other people?" "Possibly." "Do you remember who?" "No." "But you remember having exactly 2 or 3 drinks yourself?" Hayes's jaw tightened. "I remember not being drunk." Vance moved on. "You said Thomas Carter called you after the crash. What time was that?" "Around midnight, I think." "You think, or you know?" "I don't remember exactly." "Phone records from that night show no incoming calls to your number from any number associated with Thomas Carter." "He might have used a payphone." "Might have. Did he tell you he was calling from a payphone?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember much, do you, Mr. Hayes?" "Objection," Schaffer said. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Kowalski said. Vance changed tactics. "Mr. Hayes, you testified that you've listened to the recording. You said parts of it are real but taken out of context. Which parts are real?" Hayes hesitated. "I'd have to listen again to be specific. The part where you say, 'I can't go to prison, my life will be over,' is that real?" "I may have said something like that, but yes or no?" "Did you say those words?" "In a different context, yes." "What context?" "I don't recall." "The part where you say, 'My father will make sure your family is taken care of,' did you say that?" "Again, possibly in a different yes or no." "Your Honor," Schaffer objected, "the witness should be allowed to explain." "He will be," Vance said, "right after he answers the question. Did you say those words, Mr. Hayes?" Hayes's face was red now. "I don't know. I might have." "You might have promised Thomas Carter that his family would be taken care of?" "Not in the context you're implying." "What context were you implying when you said it?" "I don't remember." Vance let the outburst hang in the air for a moment. "No further questions," she said quietly. Closing arguments happened the following week. Schaffer went first again, summarizing the defense case. pointing out all the holes in the prosecution's evidence, reminding the jury that reasonable doubt was all they needed to acquit. The prosecution wants you to believe in a vast conspiracy, he said. But what they've actually shown you is a collection of circumstantial evidence, questionable witnesses, and a recording of dubious authenticity. That's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's speculation. Then it was Vance's turn. She stood in front of the jury, and when she spoke, her voice was tired but determined. 25 years ago, 3 people died because a drunk driver ran a red light. That driver was Nathaniel Hayes. And instead of accepting responsibility, instead of facing the consequences of his actions, he used his family's money and influence to destroy an innocent man's life. She walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defense wants you to focus on small inconsistencies. They want you to doubt the recording, doubt the witnesses, doubt everything except Nathaniel Hayes' word. But ask yourself, why would Thomas Carter confess to a crime he didn't commit? Why would he spend 12 years in prison, lose his family, lose everything, if he wasn't forced into it? Vance pulled out the photograph of Thomas Carter one more time. This man died believing he was a criminal. He died in shame. And the only thing standing between him and justice is you. 12 people who have the power to say that money doesn't put you above the law, that 25 years doesn't erase murder, that the truth matters. She walked back to her table. Nathaniel Hayes killed 3 people and let an innocent man take the blame. The evidence proves it. Your conscience knows it, and now it's time for justice. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of Emily sitting in her apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything except refresh news sites and pace her living room. On the afternoon of the 4th day, her phone rang. It was Vance. "They have a verdict," she said. "Get to the courthouse." Emily made it there in 20 minutes. The courtroom was packed again, every seat filled, people standing in the back. She took her place behind the prosecution table. Nathaniel Hayes was led in. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The jury filed in. Emily tried to read their faces, but they all looked carefully blank. Judge Kowalski addressed them. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" The forewoman looked down at the paper in her hands. "On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Michael Chen, we find the defendant guilty." Emily's breath stopped. "On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Sarah Chen, we find the defendant guilty." Someone in the back of the courtroom started crying. "On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Lisa Chen, we find the defendant guilty." 3 counts, 3 guilty verdicts. The forewoman continued through the remaining charges. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Witness tampering, guilty. Conspiracy, guilty. All 8 counts. Guilty on all charges. Emily heard the words, but they didn't feel real. She looked at Hayes, who'd gone completely white, his lawyers already surrounding him, whispering urgently. Judge Kowalski thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. The courtroom erupted as soon as she left the bench. Reporters rushing out to file stories, spectators arguing, Hayes' sister sobbing in the front row. Emily just sat there. Sarah Vance touched her shoulder. "We did it," she said. "Yeah," Emily whispers, "son, we did." But she didn't feel victorious. She felt empty, because her father was still gone. And a guilty verdict didn't bring him back. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for late June, but Emily didn't spend those 6 weeks celebrating. She spent them trying to figure out what justice actually meant. The guilty verdict had made headlines worldwide. Nathaniel Hayes, fallen billionaire, convicted murderer. The story had everything the media loved: wealth, corruption, a David versus Goliath narrative that fit neatly into 2-minute news segments. But for Emily, the victory felt incomplete. Her father's conviction still stood on the books. The guilty plea from 2001 hadn't been overturned yet. Technically, in the eyes of the law, both men were convicted killers now. Hayes for committing the crime, her father for confessing to it. David Park, her father's old public defender, filed a motion for posthumous exoneration 3 days after the verdict. It's a long shot, he told Emily over coffee in his cramped Brooklyn office. The legal system doesn't like admitting it got things wrong. Even with Hayes convicted, they could argue that your father's guilty plea stands on its own merits. That's insane. That's the law. Park stirred sugar into his coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. But we've got a better chance now than we ever did. Public pressure, media attention, a jury that already decided Hayes was lying, all of that works in our favor. How long will it take? Months, maybe a year. These things don't move fast. Emily stared into her own untouched coffee. He's been dead for 2 years. What difference does it make now? It makes a difference to history, Park said quietly. It makes a difference to how he's remembered. And maybe that's not everything, but it's something. Emily wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe her father would have cared about his name being cleared, even posthumously. But she couldn't shake the memory of visiting him in the hospital those last weeks, watching him struggle to breathe, and hearing him say he was sorry for failing her. He'd never once said he was innocent, never once fought the narrative that he was a drunk driver who'd killed a family. He just accepted it, carried it, died with it. The morning of the sentencing, Emily woke up at 5 a.m. from a dream she couldn't quite remember. She showered, dressed in the same black pants and white shirt she'd worn to the trial, and took the subway to Manhattan. The courthouse steps were crowded again, but the energy felt different this time. Less angry, more expectant. People wanted to see Nathaniel Hayes get what he deserved. Emily pushed through them without making eye contact. Inside, she found Sarah Vance already at the prosecution table reviewing notes. "You ready for this?" Vance asked. "I don't know what I am." "That's fair." Vance closed her folder. "Judge Kowalski is going to ask if you want to make a victim impact statement. You don't have to, but if you do, now's your chance." Emily had thought about this. Written drafts, deleted them, written new ones. She still didn't know what she wanted to say. "I'll figure it out," she said. The courtroom filled quickly. Emily spotted Claire Mendez sitting a few rows back, looking smaller than she had on the witness stand. Linda Morrison was there too, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue before anything had even started. Nathaniel Hayes was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. No expensive suit this time. No carefully styled hair. He'd been in custody since the verdict, held without bail pending sentencing. He looked broken. Emily tried to feel satisfaction at that, tried to feel vindicated. Mostly she just felt tired. Judge Kowalski entered and everyone rose. "Be seated," she said, settling into her chair with a stack of papers in front of her. "We're here for sentencing in the matter of the People versus Nathaniel Hayes. Mr. Hayes has been convicted on 8 counts, and I've reviewed the pre-sentencing report as well as letters submitted on behalf of both the defense and prosecution." She looked at Hayes over her reading glasses. "Before I pronounce sentence, I want to address something. This case has generated significant public attention, and there's been pressure from various sources to be either lenient or harsh. I want to be clear that my decision is based solely on the facts of the case, the severity of the crimes, and the interests of justice." Kowalski shuffled her papers. "Mr. Hayes, you have been convicted of causing the deaths of 3 people while driving under the influence, then orchestrating a cover-up that resulted in an innocent man spending 12 years in prison. These are not crimes of passion or momentary lapse in judgment. These are calculated actions taken repeatedly over decades to avoid responsibility." Hayes's lawyer started to stand, but Kowalski waved him down. "I've heard your arguments about your client's charitable work, his dedication to his daughter, his contributions to society, and while those things may be true, they don't erase the harm caused. 3 people are dead. A 4th man's life was destroyed. Multiple families have suffered for 25 years because of choices you made." She looked at Vance. "Does the prosecution wish to make a statement?" Vance stood. "Your Honor, the people request the maximum sentence allowed by law. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse. Even during trial, he continued to lie and attempt to discredit witnesses. He has used his wealth and influence to avoid justice for a quarter century, and only a significant sentence will serve as both punishment and deterrent." Kowalski nodded. "And the defense?" Martin Schaffer rose. He'd lost the calm authority he'd displayed during trial. Now he just looked like a lawyer fighting a losing battle. "Your Honor, while we maintain that there are serious questions about the verdict, we acknowledge the jury's decision. Mr. Hayes has a 6-year-old daughter who has already lost her mother. Sentencing him to decades in prison effectively orphans that child. We ask the court to consider a sentence that allows Mr. Hayes to eventually return to his daughter and attempt to make amends." "Noted." Kowalski turned to Emily. "Ms. Carter, You're listed as a victim in this case through the harm done to your father. Would you like to make a statement? Emily's throat went dry. She hadn't decided. Even sitting there, even knowing this was her moment, she didn't know if she had anything to say that would matter, but she stood up anyway. Yes, Your Honor, Kowalski gestured to the podium. Please proceed. Emily walked to the front of the courtroom. She could feel everyone watching her, the judge, the lawyers, the spectators, the journalists with their pens poised over notepads, and Nathaniel Hayes, sitting at the defense table with his hands folded, staring at nothing. She gripped the sides of the podium. I'm not good at speeches, she began. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet courtroom. I've watched a lot of people give them over the past few months, lawyers, reporters, strangers who have opinions about my family. Everyone seems to know exactly what to say and how to say it. She paused, trying to find the right words. My father's name was Thomas Carter. He wasn't remarkable. He didn't build companies or make millions or change the world. He was just a regular person trying to take care of his family. And when someone with money and power told him that sacrificing himself was the only way to keep us safe, he believed them. Emily looked at Hayes for the first time. I used to hate my father for that, for being weak enough to confess to something he didn't do, for leaving us to deal with the shame and the whispers and the way people looked at us, for dying before I could understand why he made that choice. Her voice cracked slightly. But the truth is, he wasn't weak. He was cornered by someone who had resources and options and chose to use those things to destroy another person's life instead of facing consequences for his own actions. She turned to Judge Kowalski. I don't know what the right sentence is. I don't know if 20 years or 30 years or life in prison actually fixes anything. Those 3 people are still dead. My father is still dead. Hayes' daughter is still going to grow up without a parent, just like I did. Emily's hands were shaking now. What I do know is that the truth matters. It took me 2 years to get anyone to listen, 6 months to build a case, and months of trial to prove what happened. And even now, there are people who think I made it all up, that I'm lying, that my father really was guilty, and I just can't accept it. She looked back at Hayes. So I guess what I want to say is this. I'm glad you were convicted. I'm glad the jury heard the evidence and made the right decision. But I don't feel victorious. I just feel like maybe, finally, people know the truth. And my father doesn't have to be remembered as a drunk driver who killed a family. He can be remembered as a man who made an impossible choice because he was given no other option. Emily stepped back from the podium. That's all, Your Honor. The courtroom was silent as she returned to her seat. Judge Kowalski made some notes, then looked at Hayes. Mr. Hayes, do you wish to address the court before sentencing? Hayes' lawyer whispered something to him urgently. Hayes shook his head and stood up on his own. Yes, Your Honor. He walked to the podium slowly. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. I've listened to everything that's been said in this courtroom over the past months. I've heard witnesses describe what I did, heard lawyers argue about my character, heard people I've never met talk about what kind of person I am. He paused. Most of it is true. Not all of it, but most. I was drinking that night. I was driving. I caused that crash. His voice broke. I killed 3 people. And instead of accepting responsibility, I let my father convince me that we could make it go away, that we could pay someone to take the blame and everything would be fine. Hayes looked at Emily. Thomas Carter wasn't supposed to die in shame. He was supposed to be compensated, taken care of. That was the deal. But after my father died, I told myself that deal died with him, that I didn't owe Carter anything because I hadn't made the arrangement. My father had. I convinced myself that was true for so long that I almost believed it. He turned back to the judge. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want to say for the record that Emily Carter is right. Her father wasn't weak. He was put in an impossible position by people who had all the power, and he did what he thought he had to do to protect his family. That's not weakness. That's love. Hayes' hands gripped the podium. I have a daughter. She's 6 years old. And the hardest part of all of this isn't the trial or the verdict or even the sentence I'm about to receive. It's knowing that she's going to grow up thinking her father is a monster, that she's going to hear stories about what I did and wonder if she's capable of the same things. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I can't undo what I did 25 years ago. I can't bring those people back. I can't give Thomas Carter his life back. All I can do is accept responsibility now, even though it's too late to matter. He stepped back from the podium and returned to his seat. Judge Kowalski waited a moment, then picked up her papers. Nathaniel Hayes, please rise. Hayes stood, his lawyer beside him. On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Michael Chen, I sentence you to 25 years to life. On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Sarah Chen, 25 years to life, to run consecutively. On the count of second-degree murder in the death of Lisa Chen, 25 years to life, to run consecutively. 75 years minimum. Hayes would be over 100 years old before he was eligible for parole. Kowalski continued through the remaining counts, adding years for each conviction. When she finished, the total sentence was effectively life in prison. This court is adjourned, she said, and brought down her gavel. Hayes was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. Emily sat in the courtroom long after most people had left. Sarah Vance stopped by her seat. You did good today. The statement. It was honest. Thanks. What are you going to do now? Emily hadn't thought that far ahead. For so long, her entire life had been focused on this case, this trial, this moment. Now that it was over, she had no idea what came next. I don't know, she said. Maybe nothing for a while. Vance smiled. Nothing sounds nice. But Emily didn't get to do nothing. 3 weeks after the sentencing, David Park called with news about the posthumous exoneration motion. The judge granted it, he said, barely containing his excitement. Your father's conviction has been vacated, completely erased from the record. In the eyes of the law, Thomas Carter is innocent. Emily was sitting in her apartment when she got the call. She'd been staring at her laptop, half-heartedly browsing job listings, when her phone rang. Now she just stared at the wall. Emily, you there? Yeah, she said. I'm here. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Feel whatever you want. But legally, officially, your father is no longer a convicted felon. His record is clean. The state has acknowledged that a miscarriage of justice occurred. After they hung up, Emily sat in the silence of her apartment. She wanted to feel relieved, vindicated, something. Instead, she felt hollow, because her father would never know. He died believing he was guilty, believing he'd failed his family, believing the lie that Nathaniel Hayes had forced him to live. And no court order could change that. Emily's phone buzzed with a text. It was from her mother. I heard about the exoneration. Can we talk? They hadn't spoken since that phone call months ago. Catherine had stayed away from the trial, refused to give interviews, made it clear she wanted nothing to do with Emily's crusade. Emily almost deleted the text, but instead she wrote back, Where? They met at a diner in Queens, the same one Emily and her father used to go to when she was young. Catherine was already there when Emily arrived, sitting in a booth by the window, looking older than Emily remembered. Hi, Mom. Emily. Catherine didn't stand up, didn't hug her, just gestured to the seat across from her. Thanks for coming. Emily slid into the booth. A waitress came by and they both ordered coffee they probably wouldn't drink. I saw the sentencings on the news, Catherine said after a long silence. Hayes got life. Effectively, yes. Good. Catherine's hands twisted around her napkin. I'm glad. I know I didn't say that before, but I'm glad he's in prison. Emily didn't respond. I was angry at you, Catherine continued. When you released that video, when you started all of this, I thought you were dragging us through hell for nothing, that you were obsessed with something that couldn't be fixed. And now? Now I don't know. Catherine looked at her daughter properly for the first time. I spent 25 years trying to forget what happened, trying to move on, build a new life, and you ripped all of that open again. Dad deserved to have his name cleared. I know, but he's dead, Emily. Clearing his name doesn't bring him back. It doesn't undo the years he spent in prison, or the shame he carried, or the fact that he died thinking he'd destroyed our family. Emily felt her throat tighten. So what was I supposed to do? Just let Hayes keep living his perfect life while Dad's reputation stayed destroyed? I don't know. Catherine's voice rose, then dropped. I don't know what you were supposed to do. I just know that for 2 years I've been watching you destroy yourself over this, risking everything, making enemies of powerful people, putting yourself in danger. And for what? A court document that says your father was innocent? It's not just a document, isn't it? Catherine's eyes were wet now. Because your father is still dead. Those 3 people Hayes killed are still dead. And you're still here alone with no job and no future and a target on your back from people who think you ruined an innocent man's life. Emily looked down at her untouched coffee. I had to do something, she said quietly. I couldn't just let it go. I know. Catherine reached across the table and took Emily's hand. It was the first time they'd touched in years. You're just like him, you know, your father. Once he decided something was right, he'd walk through fire to see it done, even if it destroyed him. That doesn't sound like a compliment. It's not. It's an observation. Catherine squeezed her hand. I loved your father, Emily, but watching him sacrifice himself for a promise that was never kept nearly killed me. And watching you do the same thing, throw yourself into this crusade, brought all of that back. Emily felt tears on her cheeks now. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I made you relive all of this. But I'm not sorry I did it. Catherine nodded slowly. I know. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you needed to do this so you could move on, so we both could. They sat in the diner for another hour, talking about small things. Catherine's job at the hospital, Emily's plans to go back to school, the weather, the coffee, which had gone cold. When they finally left, Catherine hugged Emily on the sidewalk. Take care of yourself, she said. Please. I will. And Emily, your father would have been proud of you, even if he wouldn't have admitted it. 4 months after the sentencing, Emily enrolled in a paralegal certification program at a community college in Brooklyn. She thought about law school, but that felt too big, too overwhelming. She wanted to help people, but she wasn't ready to spend 3 more years studying and taking on massive debt. The paralegal program was practical. 6 months of classes, then she could start working at a law firm or nonprofit, helping people navigate a legal system that had chewed up her family and spit them out. She took the subway to classes 3 nights a week. During the day, she worked at a legal aid clinic in the Bronx, filing paperwork and answering phones and occasionally sitting in on client meetings. The work was boring and exhausting and paid almost nothing. Emily loved it because every person who came through those doors had a story like hers. Someone who'd been failed by the system, screwed over by people with power, left to figure out how to survive in a world that wasn't built for them. And Emily could help. Not in dramatic ways, not with viral videos or press conferences, just by knowing which forms to file, which deadlines mattered, which judges were sympathetic, and which ones weren't. Small victories. Incremental progress. But it mattered. On a cold afternoon in November, almost a year after the trial ended, Emily got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Emily Carter? Yes. My name is Angela Chen. I was Lisa Chen's cousin. Emily's breath caught. Lisa Chen, the 8-year-old girl who died in the crash. I wanted to reach out, Angela continued, her voice shaky, after the trial, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me, if it would be too much. I'm listening, Emily said quietly. My family watched the trial, all of it, and we wanted you to know we're grateful for what you did, for making sure the truth came out. Emily closed her eyes. I'm so sorry for what happened to your family. We know it wasn't your fault. We know your father didn't do it, and we're sorry for what he went through, what you went through. Angela paused. We're having a memorial service next month, on the anniversary of the crash. We'd like you to come, if you want to. Emily thought about it, about facing the family of the people Hayes had killed, the people her father had supposedly killed for 25 years. I'll be there, she said. The memorial was held in a small church in Long Island. About 50 people gathered, mostly family, some friends, a few reporters who'd been following the case. Emily sat in the back, not wanting to intrude. Angela found her anyway. Thank you for coming, she said, sitting down beside Emily. It means a lot. Of course. The service was simple. People shared memories of Michael, Sarah, and Lisa Chen. Talked about what kind of people they'd been, what they'd loved, what they'd dreamed about. Lisa had wanted to be a veterinarian. Sarah had painted watercolors. Michael had coached Little League. They weren't just victims. They'd been people with full lives, cut short by someone's reckless choice. When the service ended, Angela introduced Emily to other family members. They were kind, gracious, more forgiving than Emily thought she could have been in their position. Your father didn't deserve what happened to him, Lisa's grandmother said, gripping Emily's hand. I'm glad his name was cleared. I'm glad people know the truth." Emily thanked her, not trusting herself to say more. On the drive back to the city, Emily thought about justice. Real justice, not the courtroom kind. Nathaniel Hayes was in prison. Her father's name was cleared. The truth was on the record. But 3 people were still dead. Her father was still gone. A 6-year-old girl was growing up without a father because of choices made decades ago. There were no winners here, just varying degrees of loss. And maybe that was the real lesson. That justice wasn't about revenge or vindication or even truth. It was about acknowledgement, about making sure the people who'd been hurt weren't forgotten, about refusing to let lies become the official story. It didn't undo the harm. It didn't bring anyone back. But it mattered. That night, Emily went to the cemetery. It was late, almost midnight. The gates were technically closed, but she'd found a gap in the fence months ago. She walked to her father's grave and sat down on the cold ground. "Hey, Dad," she said quietly. "I went to a memorial today for the family Hayes killed. They were nice, nicer than they had any reason to be." The wind rustled through the bare trees. "Your conviction was overturned. I know you can't hear this, but I wanted to tell you anyway. You're officially innocent. The record is clear. When people look up your name now, they won't see convicted killer. They'll see wrongly imprisoned." Emily pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. "I don't know if that matters to you, wherever you are. I don't know if you'd be proud or angry or just confused about why I couldn't let it go. Mom thinks I'm like you, too stubborn to walk away from something once I've decided it's right." She smiled slightly. "I'm going to law school eventually. Not now, but soon. I want to help people like us, people who get screwed by the system because they don't have money or connections or power. I figure that's something you'd understand." Emily stood up, brushing dirt off her jeans. "I miss you, and I'm sorry you died thinking you'd failed us, because you didn't. You did what you thought you had to do to protect us, even though it destroyed you. That's not failure, that's love." She touched the headstone once, then walked back through the dark cemetery toward the gap in the fence. Behind her, the city lights glowed against the night sky. Millions of people living their lives, most of them never thinking about justice or truth or the weight of choices made decades ago. Emily had spent a year fighting to expose one lie, to clear one name, to hold one powerful man accountable. It had cost her everything: her job, her relationship with her mother, her anonymity, her peace. But when she thought about her father, about Thomas Carter spending 12 years in prison for something he didn't do, she couldn't regret it. Some things were worth fighting for, even when you knew you might lose. Some truths were worth telling, even when nobody wanted to hear them. And some lies were too big to let stand no matter how much time had passed. Emily walked out of the cemetery and into the cold November night. She had class in the morning, work in the afternoon. A life to build from the pieces of everything that had shattered. But for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, finally, she could breathe. The truth was out. Her father's name was clear. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as it was, had been served, and that would have to be enough. Because in the end, the most valuable thing wasn't money or power or revenge. It was knowing that when you looked in the mirror, you could recognize the person staring back. Emily had spent her whole life feeling invisible. The waitress nobody noticed, the daughter of a convicted criminal, the woman who served champagne to people who'd never see her as fully human. But she'd learned something important in that vault room, standing in front of Nathaniel Hayes and all his powerful friends. Being underestimated was a weapon. Being invisible was a choice. And the truth, once spoken, couldn't be silenced, no matter how much money you had or how many lawyers you hired. 3 years later, Emily graduated from law school. She worked at a nonprofit defending wrongly convicted people, using everything she'd learned from her father's case to help others trapped in a system designed to grind them down. She never became famous, never wrote a book or sold her story, or became the face of criminal justice reform. She just showed up every day and did the work. And on the anniversary of the day, she'd walked into the Obsidian Club with a camera hidden in her collar and her father's phone in her pocket. She always visited the cemetery. Sometimes her mother came with her. They'd stand at Thomas Carter's grave together, not saying much, just being present with the memory of a man who'd made an impossible choice and paid for it with everything he had. The headstone had been replaced. The new one was simpler, cleaner. It read, Thomas Carter, beloved father and husband, innocent. And beneath that, a single line Emily had insisted on adding: "The truth always rises, even if it takes 25 years. Even if it costs everything, the truth always rises. And once it does, not even billionaires can stop it."